All right, welcome to our Wednesday Bible class. If you want to go and open up your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 11, 1 Samuel chapter 11. Let's get turned over there. We're continuing to look at a survey of 1 and 2 Samuel, and we went through chapters 1 through 10. And then tonight we've got a bunch. We're going to try to take from 11 to 31. So we got about 20 chapters. Could be hard. But we'll see. I mean, if we can't, we can split it. We'll see what it does. It depends on your participation and, how much I can blah, blah, blah. But, I think that it is. There's just so much. Right before I came, my mind's going, oh, how do we get all this? Keep it to where we're not diving and digging too deep, but not overlooking some aspects. So yeah, 1 Samuel 11. If you're joining us this evening on live stream, we're glad you took the time to be with us. I do have our social media stuff up, so if you want to contribute comments, questions, whatever you want, we'd love to get you involved in the class this evening with us. And if you're watching this in the future, you can still drop some comments and love to hear from you. Before we get going, let's go ahead and have a quick word of prayer. Our most loving and merciful Father, we are extremely humbled as we think about this time that we've been blessed with to be able to study your word, to come here in this comfortable building, the freedom that we have to live our lives and to meditate upon your word. We thank you, Father, for each person who's taken the time to be with us this evening. We hope that everything that we're talking about, discussing, and reading would be appropriately understood and spoken so that we can shape our lives into the spirit we need to have in order to help those around us. We ask this in Christ's name, amen. So the first 10 chapters basically starts out, and this is a big transition where we're going from the time period of the judges, and 1st, 2nd Samuel is really that time where the kingdom is going to go from no king. There was no king in that day, and everybody's doing what they wanted, judges, to the last judge, Samuel, and moving on over into the king. 1st and 2nd Samuel really there's only 3 kings that will be talked about, during these 2 books, and it's Saul, David, and Solomon at the end. And then 1st, 2nd Kings picks up the history of all the other kings, and that's where we'll go after the Samuel books. But the first 10 are important because it opens up the transitional period where we find that, like Hannah, it starts out, with Hannah and her prayer, her request, her desire so much to have a child and be able to have it serve the Lord. And then the blessing she receives from it, but that child was Samuel. And then Samuel's service in the temple with Eli, he was a prophet at that time. And immediately we see the transition is pretty brash compared to what Eli and his boys and the way they were judging and everything. They were pretty corrupt. And then the finale was the Philistine battle where they took the ark, captured it, and take it off, and his sons were killed. And then when Eli hears the news, he then falls off, breaks his neck. But remember, just before that, we see where the Spirit of the Lord was already on Samuel. And Samuel was already accredited and credible as a prophet himself. We don't know how old he is at this time, when this all happened necessarily. But it was an important setup to the character of Samuel himself. Now, we also know, though, we saw where his boys weren't all that great either. And it seems to be the difference was where with Eli, the Lord flat out says, you didn't do anything. You didn't try to stop him. And I don't know. We don't have a lot of information about. There's only a mention later on we'll see about his sons, but it's not significantly like they're evil anymore. I don't know. It's not brought back up again in Samuel's life that, that was his downfall. As a matter of fact, we're going to read tonight that where Samuel's going to challenge them to basically bring something and charge what I've done wrong. So I think as far as like with his boys, we don't really know. But he was put in a position that he was going to have to appoint a king. And he took it as a personal rejection of him as being their judge, their spiritual leader. And God said, no, they're rejecting me, not you. And so he sends him through the process. We see where he goes and selects Saul. And he is the picture perfect dude, handsome, strong, big, like literally they describe him as head above everyone else. So, on that day, actually it's kind of interesting. He was probably 6 foot. Because most were 5'5", the men and stuff. So a 6 foot man was huge. I'm 6'1", and my boys tower over me nowadays. But he was that picture perfect guy. And we see that how fast things start to turn. And that's where we're getting into it now. Is he starts out really well. And it's kind of strange because think about it now. They don't have a palace. They don't have a king. They don't have the infrastructure to support a royalty. It seems to be really awkward, and that's where it starts out real quick in chapter 11. He's out, comes back with behind some ox. Like, wait, you're king. So it is kind of an interesting transition to him coming into power. But it's quick, we'll see his heart when it's under pressure, what happens to him. Samuel warns them again, that Israel and the king must obey. So the roadmap for this lesson tonight is looking at how Saul starts out doing great, but how quick we see his real heart come out. And then Samuel's warning to the people and to the king about obedience to the Lord. And then we'll see David being chosen, revealed, tested to the hilt, right? But also protected, very well protected. And then the book's going to close with the fall of Saul. And David ready to rise up. And it's an amazing time period. When we start to look at the number of years, Saul ruled 40 years. That's a long time. You'd think, hey, dude, you had a good run. I mean, how many people get to be king? 40 years. Maybe it's just me, but for the longest time, every time I would think of Saul and David, it was like, maybe 10, 15 years, and David comes on the scene, because as you're reading it, he comes on the scene, he gets anointed, and then he turns bad, gets the kingdom ripped away, and then David comes on the scene. And somehow it just seems like that's in a short period of time. No, he's been ruling. He rules 40 years. David is anointed. Most scholars, we don't have an exact date, believe it's possibly a teenager, young teenager, because we know he was the youngest of them all. He was belittled. He was the one stuck home, right? So most scholars believe that, he's probably a teenager. And we do know, though, when he starts to rule, and that's the age of 30. So he spends, they believe, 7 to 10 years alone running on the run, not to mention the years of him in the palace and being tortured and, all that's going on with him. So it was a very long process. And so that's one of the things we see. So 11, we're going to go through it like chapter, hit the big points. I'm going to be scrolling through. So if you're scrolling through and I missed something or you got a question, stop me. Because like I said, we got a bunch of chapters to kind of go through. What we find in chapter 11 is right away, Nahash, the Amorite king, comes up against one of the Israelite cities. It's on the eastern side in the tribe of Manasseh, on the other side of the Jordan from all the other tribes. So they're kind of exposed. They're out across. And so what happens is the Amorite king, Nahash, comes along and he threatens Jabesh Gilead. Remember that city. This is going to come all the way back at chapter 31, what this city does. And they kind of do a peace treaty, and they're like, okay, I tell you what, let us think about this. But the deal was, you can surrender to us, but the only way is we get to take out the right eye of every male. It was a part of humiliation, and that's what he wanted to do. And he go, well, give us 7 days. And the ESV says basically, give us 7 days. If somebody can come and fight for us, then we will. Otherwise, we'll submit. And so they get message back to where Saul's at. And that's where we find Saul coming along. It says in verse 5 of 11, it says, and when the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul and reported these terms to the people, they all wept. Just then Saul was returning from the fields behind his oxen. Is that what the king does? Doesn't seem real kingly, huh? There seems to be, and we'll see this, especially after this battle, he wasn't real accepted. There was some people who didn't want him. And I think, remember, he was hiding in the baggages and then Samuel had to call him out. Hey, get around from the bags. Come here. And so it seems like he got anointed, and Samuel points him out, but I don't know what happened because now he's back out in the fields. So he comes back when he hears about this threat to Gibeah Gilead, and then this is when it says, verse 6, this is key. Then when Saul heard that, the Spirit of God came upon him powerfully, and he burned with anger. And then he takes those 2 oxes and cuts them up, sends them out with a message. You need to rally. You need to get your people here. And if you don't, guess what? Basically, this is what's going to happen to you. And they do. And so he tells the people from the city of Jabesh Gilead, go home, play it out, tell them we're coming, and set it up. So they set up a fake type of treaty. And they go out during the heat of the day as if they're going to go ahead and submit, get their eyes gouged out. And after riling the people, they show up. And it's a quick, not a lot of description about the battle. Verse 10, the Amorites, they said to the Amorites, tomorrow we'll surrender to you and you can do whatever you like to us. I don't know, if I was an Amorite, I'd be going, are you kidding me? You just said that? I can gouge your eye out? But anyway, so they said tomorrow. So the next day, Saul comes in, divides up his troops, and come in and decisively defeat them. It slaughtered them. I think this is the key event, why it's so important, this one, is because it helps to solidify him as king in rallying them around and bringing them together. Because then right after that, we see everybody's like, whoa, look what Saul did. He brought us together. And so they come together in verses 12 there, we find where he gives, sacrifice. Samuel's involved here, and it says, shall Saul reign over us? And they're like, yes. But they're this is where I say, I think there were a lot of people that were like, we don't want that guy. Because this is where Saul actually shows mercy. This will be the last time, by the way. You'll hear Saul being so merciful. Because they want to kill anyone who is opposed to him ruling. And he goes, no, we're going to show mercy. We're not doing that. And they sacrifice offerings for the Lord. And they had a great celebration. And so he's publicly confirmed. I think that's why it shows that now he is in power. The people have finally brought him in. If you'll remember, that's kind of what happens with David. David gets anointed, but it's not like inauguration of a president where, you have a big ceremony and they go through all the swearing in and all that, and then he goes to the White House. No, that's not the way either Saul or David. Chapter 12, we see the farewell address. And he starts out by talking about his faithful leadership and reminding them about what he has accomplished. And he tells him, you now have a king. I'm getting old. My sons, see, this is where we hear about his sons. My sons are here with you. And remember, we found out, that, like I said, in the first 10 chapters, his boys weren't real good either. They were corrupt. And now he says, testify against me in the presence of the Lord and his anointed. That means the king. So his boys are up there, and if they were as corrupt, I think that would have been brought up. They could have brought that up and said, yeah, you did a great job, but you did not control your boys. Your boys were sinful. So I don't know. I may be reaching a little, but I think his boys may have repented, and he got them back under control. He says, they're here with me. And he opens himself up to criticism. He reminds them in this speech about what God has done for them, and how God has delivered them in the past. And so he's bringing up, and this is something God always does through his people. And that's why, when people are teaching or preaching, it's important to bring up the historical points. It's not just because it's an old dead book, the Old Testament. It's real history. And when you forget your history, you don't know where you're going. You don't understand what you're going through, and you can't see where you need to be going and staying focused. And your faith is built upon what you can know what God has done, right? That's important. And so for us today, the Old Testament is important to us because it shows us as well. And you see it time and time again, like this, where he reminds them what God has done and to deliver them as well. He does get a little testy, he rebukes them for demanding a king. The idea that, you forgot your God, and, you forgot you've chosen a king. And so the Lord has set a king over you. But he reminds them that if you obey, things can still be fine. It's about obedience. It's not a political structure, in other words, that's going to protect you or make you better. It's about your faithfulness, period. It's kind of like, it doesn't matter how many times you go to church. It's about your faithfulness. That's what counts. And that's a part of the core message, I think, one of those in this book of Samuel. And especially we see it come out in Saul, right? And then we see him just take a left turn in chapter 13. What we find is because of this success that then Jonathan, attacks a Philistine outpost in verse 3. See, who did he fight? It was the Amorites. They were on the other side. And now he's in power, and Jonathan now takes off, and he's going to regain and defend some of these cities. And he's successful, and the word gets out. The word gets out. And there's a call by the king to bring your troops, because now the Philistines are gathering up, and they're getting ready to come. And so he tries to rally. And this is the problem with a new king and leadership and people who are used to being beaten down so much, because the Philistines basically have them in a situation where they have no weapons. That's what we see in this. And so all of a sudden, they're rallying, but then when they go out and they see everything that they're facing, they're like, oh, I don't know. He rallied when he went and defended the city, and he attacked the Amalekites, 330,000. So why are they now, when they come and line up and they see the Philistines, they had 30,000 chariots, but they had the technology, and that's all they saw. They're not seeing God, in other words, in the plan at all. They fail to see that. And so they become very afraid, and they hide. They basically kind of hide. And so, but before this, after they're afraid, we don't get all the story, but apparently, obviously, Samuel's involved, because he has instructed Saul to wait for me. I'm going to come and I'm going to offer sacrifice, and then we'll go to war. Get right with God, you see. But he delayed. And now you got to give him a little credit because he's trying to hold them together. And they're starting to scatter. They were already hiding, and he only had about 600 men. And now remember what I told you? How many did he have before? When he fought before? Over 300,000? And when he called out and they all started coming, they started seeing what they're against, they started hiding in the rocks and everything. And then they're starting to leave, going AWOL. And so he's like, I got to do something to try to keep them focused. And so he goes ahead and takes it upon himself. He also is not seeing the spiritual side, the trust in God. Samuel is still a man of God. He is still, the one who should be doing these sacrifices and such. And that's where he took it upon himself and logically, worldly, tried to take over leadership. And it was wrong because it was not what he should have done. And so he gets rebuked by this. Samuel says, "What have you done?" He says, "Well, I saw the men were scattering and you didn't come at the set time. And the Philistines were assembling. And now the Philistines are coming against me at Gilgal, and I haven't sought the favor of the Lord. So I felt compelled to offer a burnt offering." That doesn't sound too terrible. Let's go ahead and offer it. In other words, not only were my people running away, but they were starting to assault us, starting to attack. And if you weren't thinking about God and faith and spiritually, you'd go, well, let's get right with God, let's do the sacrifice, and let's go. He hadn't shown up. He should have been here already. Let's do the sacrifice and let's go to war. But the failure was his faith in God that, you need to obey. And what Samuel was saying was from God. You see, not just this guy. God had told him basically to wait, Once we have the sacrifice, then. And I don't care what's raging around you. You wait. And that's what was so abusive about what he was doing and why the rebuke is so sharp. Because, when I started trying to defend Saul and I thought I could see those logical things in the world's perspective, but then I could immediately see what a failure of faith. And that's what was happening there. And so in that rebuke, he then gets the message that your dynasty is going to die with you. And then he tries to stop it, doesn't he? He wants him, felt compelled, and, he tries to hold on to him. And this is where, look in 16 about the condition of them. They don't have this, they don't have the technology. And this is where then 14 comes in and shows us a huge difference between Jonathan and his dad. I mean, they are so opposite. You have his dad is so selfish and lacking of spiritual fortitude, and you find Jonathan then is somebody who is right the opposite. And so they're still in this battle front or setting, and it doesn't look real good, and there's nothing really happening. And so we see Jonathan, he decides to take initiative, and he takes him and just him and his armor bearer. He goes, "Come on, let's go. Let's go sneak up over there and let's see what's going on." And so he just sneaks up through, and he comes up and he decides, you know what? This is what we're going to do. Me and you, man. Me and you. right by the enemy lines. I'm going to stand up. We're going to show ourselves. And if they tell us we're coming down to you, then the Lord's not with us. But we're going to stand and take it. But if they tell us to come up, then we know we got them. But think about that. Two of them. Because what does he say? He says basically, whether it's by few are many the Lord can save. Whoa, his dad couldn't wait to offer the sacrifice by Samuel. Here, he's totally exposed, just him and his armor bearer, and says, nah. You wonder, you think, he's a lot smarter and spiritual. Sometimes you wonder, is he really your daddy? I just kind of wonder, how did you grow up, with this type of a person, a father? And it causes, they go up and they slaughter the group within, it talks about so many acres, but it creates, and then the Lord, this is something else. He wasn't alone, He wasn't alone, because once they initiate that battle, we see this panic strike them in verse 15, and the panic struck the whole army, and those in the camp in the field and those in the outpost. It was like an earthquake. There was no physical earthquake, but it was like this spiritual thing just rippled out to everyone. 2 men attack, and they're being successful, and you'd say, well, just send reinforcements over there and take them out, boys. But something, because of that, through them, and the Lord used that as an opportunity to just terrorize them. So it's something that's, again, about faith. He took it on. Now, that's why I'm saying, compare that to his dad. The difference. And so he Israel ends up routing the Philistines, and they pursue him. God gives them that great victory. But then in this pursuit, and it's a long, hard pursuit, they're running, they're chasing the Philistines and battling them, and you outrun your logistics in a way. Where's your water? Where's your food? You got to keep contact with the enemy. That's one of the biggest military strategical issues there is with the military. And that's what, you remember Patton? His tanks were running out of gas because he was so far ahead. They told him to stop because you're too far ahead. You're running. We can't keep the bullets and the fuel with you because you're too far extended. And he had to go steal gas from another place and bring it over. This kind of the same, where they've kind of outrun their logistics. And so now they're starving. They're thirsty. They're exhausted. And they're trying to stay in pursuit. Well, Jonathan, he's out, and he comes back. He's not heard, but Saul makes an oath. Nobody's eating anything. Nobody's going to eat. We're going to keep fighting. We got to keep going. His men were saying, we need a little bit of a break. We need a respite here, And no, we're going to keep going. No drinking, no eating. We're just going to keep going. Well, Jonathan, he's coming back. He saw some honey, dips his spear in it. He eats some of the honey. And when he comes back and his guys are telling him that, they're like, what? No. When we pounce on a place and we get some of their food and their supplies, we're going to eat it. And they did. So they ignored Saul and went ahead as they were killing and battling, and they'd come across the camps and they would see the supplies. They ate, they refitted in a sense, and they kept the pursuit going. That's logical. That was wise. Well, Saul's sitting up there just kind of like, whoa, look at us. But, he made a rash. He said, any man who does that's going to die. And so when it's found out, it's kind of interesting because Jonathan doesn't seem to say anything when he comes back, and it comes up that somebody says, yeah, they were eating all the food and they were drinking and they're doing all this. And Saul's like, well, who did that? And it's arrogance, because he takes him and his son on one side and he puts them on the other side as if, well, not me and my son, we didn't do that. It was him. It was Jonathan. So they start casting lots and they whittle it down, and all of a sudden they find out it's Jonathan. And Jonathan's, yeah, okay. The king made a command, then you need to kill me. And you know what? I think he was going to do it. Because we see where his own men, interceded. They had to stop it and go, no, no way, you're not going to kill Jonathan. And this is then, again, so we're starting to see a lot about Saul, aren't we? You're seeing a characteristic of him. One, he's not in touch with reality of the battlefield. He's very selfish. He's not thinking. And then he'd turn around, and from the reading of this, he would have had Jonathan killed. I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, and then so 15, it's not a shock when we come into chapter 15. Now, this is fascinating because this ties back to a prophecy and a command that God had given Moses in the wilderness. God had told him, when you come into the land and you settle everything down, you go and destroy the Amalekites, wipe them out, because they took advantage of the weak and those that were in the rear end of the train as they were traveling, and attacked them and robbed them and harassed them. And God said, when we get settled, don't forget the Amalekites. This is nearly 400 years later. God didn't forget. So that's why this is something very important, because God said he's going to do it. He commanded. And if you'll recall again, I kind of went over, I missed it, but something else. Moses told Joshua the same command. He told Joshua, and when you get settled, you need to take care of the Amalekites. And then we go through the 350 years of the judges. And now God, through Samuel, comes to him and tells him. And he said, I'm the one that appointed you king over these people. So now listen now to this message from the God. In other words, I anointed you, but you need to listen. I think there's a problem with his attention span, maybe, Doesn't seem to really come on, pay attention. It's important. The Lord Almighty says, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came back up from Egypt. So now go attack them, totally destroy them, all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men, women, children, infants, cattle, sheep, camels, donkeys. Total annihilation. It's a harsh judgment, but it's something, there's a lot of commands sometimes. People think it's almost like this. I mean, when we read and we read something in the New Testament and it says, we shouldn't do this, or, certain moral boundaries that, sometimes I see people almost respond like, well, that's kind of harsh. Well, it's God's standard, and he's trying to help us. And he is bringing a judgment on the Amalekites that I cannot comprehend. It's God understands the hearts of the Amalekites and the impact that they were going to have. And so, to me, it's vicious to me, but it's God's righteousness being carried out. So he goes, he ambushes him, and now something in interesting 6, the Canaanites. Remember, they're the ones who are serving. But he goes to them and tells them to move away, step away, because when I come in, I don't want you to be injured. And so he attacks them all the way, the entire region, all the way down to Egypt. The Canaanites were kind, and so that's why he was protecting them. But there's that word, but, verse 9, right? He spared the king and the best of the sheep and the cattle and the fat calves, and that he had a justification in his own mind. Hey, they're no longer a nation. They're gone. I've got their king. I've destroyed them. They're not coming back from that and thinking, well, I've accomplished it. But this is where then Samuel early in the morning comes along, and I always love that, the way that the interaction, when verse 13, when Samuel reaches Saul, The Lord bless you. I've carried out the Lord's instructions. That right away should be going, right? Did you? And so I love this. This has always been one of my favorite verses. Then what is that bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of cattle I hear? Yeah. That's kind of frightening, that somebody stand before the Lord on judgment and go, look what I've done. I followed you. I was faithful. And then the Lord's going to go, well, let's talk about this other stuff here. Well, I went to church. I did. Yeah, as if he wasn't going to find out about it. And Samuel's upset. Enough. This is interesting because he already knew it, didn't he? Because it says, let me tell you what the Lord told me last night. And Saul's like, tell me. Samuel said, although you were once small in your own eyes, you did not become the head of the tribes of Israel. The Lord anointed you king over Israel. He sent you on a mission saying, go and completely destroy the wicked people, the Amalekites, wage war against them until you have wiped them out. Why did you not obey? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? So he didn't see the plunder like he's trying to project, that but I brought the best back so I can sacrifice. No, you weren't. You're lying. You brought it back so you could become richer, but I obeyed. I went on the mission assigned me. I completely destroyed him. I brought back the king. Hey, dude, he's also an Amalekite. And he's still breathing oxygen. If it's his corpse, okay. What part of dead did you miss? Destroy.
He wasn't going to be king anymore, so why bring him in? He wasn't going to be king anymore.
He's a trophy. It reminds me of like all the other kings and monarchs and stuff, is that even the Roman emperors, one of the big things they did was they would have a big, a triumph, they called it, the emperors, where after, like when Caesar killed, defeated the Germanics and came back, and he would parade the leaders, by the neck, and then they would strangle them in front of everybody. It was like to show the humiliation and great defeat and his power over that king. So it kind of has some shadows of this idea that somehow he thinks, well, now I got a trophy, or something like that. This is interesting because this has also got is here in 22. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices? Okay, now I'm stopping on purpose, kind of. I didn't finish reading that. So if I was asking you that question and you were in the Old Testament, what's the answer? Yes. Absolutely. He kind of commands us, right, to do sacrifices and burnt offerings. As much as in obeying the Lord, well, isn't sacrifices and burning obedience? Isn't that? Well, that's the way a Saul would think, because that's not what it's about. Obedience is total obedience. It's not just about, it's kind of like somebody let's rephrase this in modern. Does the Lord delight in you going to church and Bible study as much as obeying him? See what I mean? Our modern version would be something like that. Samuel would be saying to us, do you think going to church and going to Bible study is as important as obeying the Lord? No, there's more to it than just that. See, remember, he said, well, I brought it so I could sacrifice to the Lord. But you violated and you didn't obey. So, and this is powerful. For rebellion is like the sin of divination. What is that? Witchcraft. Mm-hmm.
He wasn't supposed to have those animals from him. So he's saying that he sacrificed, but God didn't want the sacrifice from him.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, it's not You took the best of something that was already judged to be destroyed and not fit for life. See? And now you're going to try to bring that to the Lord? No. It just so he gets the word, you've rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. And then you get the pity party, you get the begging. Saul says to Samuel, I have sinned, I have violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men and I gave in to them. You're king. Get your big boy pants on. You are king. And you're afraid of them? That would just kind of almost solidify it. I'd say, yeah, that's another reason. Just that attitude alone, you're not fit. If you can't stand up, to sin, that's what he would have to do, is stand up to people trying to say, oh, let's keep them. No, because that would be disobeying if we don't destroy everything, and it would be sinful. So even his excuse is showing he can't stand for righteousness. And now he begs him. He goes, please come back, because it's all about perception, right? Come back with me so the people will see you with me and worship with me and offer sacrifice. Because he knows that the people, when they see Samuel part from him, then he doesn't have the God with him. And Samuel said, no, I won't go back to you. You've rejected the word of the Lord. The Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. So he turned to leave, and what happened? Grabbed hold of his robe, and it tore. And then he got another message. You have now are going to have this kingdom torn away from you. And there's nobody, which this has to be something as we move through the rest of this First Samuel in the back of his mind, that no one of his lineage is going to rule. And we'll see later on that must have been dispiriting to him, because that means Jonathan. There's no one to carry on his legacy. What's that?
God's Spirit also.
Yeah, we see that right here, don't we? Samuel comes out, puts him to death, and Samuel leaves. Saul goes home. Until the day Samuel died, he did not go see Saul again, though Samuel mourned for him, and the Lord regretted he had made Saul king over Israel. So the kingdom is being torn away from him, and that's where you'd say, well, tomorrow? I mean, you get that, I would be like, next week? No, because we know that there's about 10 years more. So this is why I said, if he ruled 40 years, and we can say that from the time David is anointed to the time David rules is about 10 years, you can see that there's 10 more years. So that means this happened when he had been ruling for at least 30 years. He's not a new king, in other words. This is just one great story of his failure of faith. It's the highlights to teach us how broken he was. There's a whole lot the Lord knew more, but these were the breaking points for God. And then, and it's interesting, because as angry as Samuel was, he still loved Saul. You kind of go, after what he did to you, Samuel? What does that tell us about Samuel? He was long-suffering. He wasn't a hard-line person. He wasn't so hard of heart that he was that's it, I'm done with him, and that's all. So remember, he didn't want to put a king in. It's almost like, hey, Samuel, don't you remember when we started this? You were like, no, you took it personal, and now I'm rejecting him. So it shows you that he is a very spiritually sensitive person.
I think, too, it shows that your love for brethren, and if someone goes astray from God, reward for that, because we saw what they were in the beginning and then they turned away. It is hard.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because, that is so important aspect for us today as well. People that we have a spiritual, and I've had those throughout my life that were very faithful Christians, and then they go off into sin, and it's appalling. You're disgusted with what they might have done. And then I've seen there's two responses. You can be like Samuel, where you're still mournful for their condition, or you can be saying, oh, well, no more sin, get them out. They wouldn't repent. They deserve what they're going to get. It's on them. And somehow we sterilize that process, and it's almost like we want the perfect church. So if you're in sin, it's better just get rid of you than to be long-suffering. It's easier. Just cut it. Don't try to work through this, you see. It's harder, isn't it? It's a whole lot harder to sit and try to restore somebody and help them and keep loving them in spite of themselves. And there's some who have come back. I have seen that. I have seen examples of men and women who have turned from the Lord and stayed away for a long time in hardcore sin. And if you treat them, and you start taking that hard line, that heartless, long, short suffering, and thank God we don't have sin in our building, it's like that, and they don't come back. Does that not make you weep? And that's where we have to be very careful why it's so hard. So this opening up at chapter 16, when the Lord says to him, the Lord said, Samuel, how long are you going to mourn for Saul? Now, what's a day to the Lord? What do we say? So how long has he been mourning? I don't know. I just thought of that. When God tells you like this, now I don't know. It's not like he's told me, but if God was to tell you, well, how long are you going to keep mourning? The Lord's timeless, right? So I don't know. I just he put a time on him, like it's time to move on, in other words. Get over it. Yeah, it's kind of like, come on, man, we got something else to do. And he gives him a mission. It almost sounds like Elijah, doesn't it? Later on, when Elijah goes to the cave and he runs off and he nearly kills himself and he gets into the cave, and then the Lord comes to him and goes, what are you doing here? In a small voice, what are you doing? Get up. You got some things to do. You need to get out of here. You need to go down, anoint the king of Syria, Damascus, I think it was, and then you need to go and find Elisha. I've got a replacement for you. Come on, let's go. Doesn't it sound like this, Samuel? It's like, hey, fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Bethlehem. I've got a king that we're going to anoint. And then this is where we can see, again, that's what I mean. Sometimes when we read through the books, time seems compressed. In other words, like this just happened. In other words, what we just read was like yesterday or a week or two. I think we're talking a lot longer because there's things in the background that you pick up on. For example, why is Samuel now afraid to go down and do this in the public? Because of Saul possibly killing him. It wasn't like they had Twitter or Instagram to where stuff spread so fast. It took time to where I think that I can't say, but it wasn't like within a week. I think we're talking months has been gone by, enough to where all the talk has spread throughout all the tribes. There's been a falling out. And a lot of people heard what Samuel told Saul. The kingdom's being torn apart. You're not going to rule. You're not going to have a dynasty. So what does that tell you? If you're, Billy Bob in Ephraim tribe, we got another king coming somewhere, right? Change's coming. And we can see that his attitude, Saul, has already become aggressive. He's already turning. And so Samuel is aware of it. So he is kind of in hiding. And so they set it up. Okay, well, take a sacrifice down and go down there and as if you're going there to have a sacrifice. Another very interesting thing is why I think that we can draw the conclusion I just made about the time and the attitude politically that's going on in the tribes is because when we see when he arrives at Bethlehem, they're panicked. They're like, why are you here? A lot of it could be just straight up. I mean, he had been judging Israel for all those years and he traveled to a place, he could be coming and saying, you got sin. We're going to fix it. And then he brings the sacrifice, right? Is that sacrifice because you're going to lay out some lightning on some people or you're going to, what have we done? It's like dad showed up out of nowhere. It's like, uh-oh. Or it could also be that, they know that if Samuel's around and what's going on politically between Samuel and Saul. So either way, it was very stressful. And so we can get a sense that there's a lot of politically things that have already grown to a very tense, hostile situation. They ask him, do you come in peace? Yes, I come in peace. Calms them down. And he said, Samuel replied, well, if it's in peace or not, I mean, it would prepare them to handle what's the business, what's going on. You're coming here with a sacrifice. So then he goes to the house of Jesse, and they have a sacrifice with Jesse and his sons. And then we see that then the process basically of going through the boys. But each one that they go through is not the one, right? Now, one of the things he says that's very powerful is verse 7. The Lord tells Samuel, don't consider his appearance or height or age, for I have rejected him. In other words, you're looking, because God knows Samuel's heart too, but he doesn't know he's going to select. So you see, big brother come out, looks, and Samuel's, is this him, And the Lord kind of knows, like, no, quit looking and trying to think that what you're seeing in his presentation of his physical physique or whatever, that's what I'm looking for. So don't try to pick here, Samuel. It's almost like a test of Samuel because Samuel doesn't know. He goes through all the boys. And it's almost like teaching Samuel, I look on the inside. You're seeing the outside. Mm-hmm. He could have just told him.
Saul was like everybody else. So Samuel's probably thinking of Saul person that looks like Samuel thought that.
Yeah.
He didn't want to run.
Right.
Yeah, not the runt. We'll go ahead and wrap up because this has been a good. Like I said, I'm afraid to go too fast, go too slow, and there's so much more in this, and we'll come back and talk about this because this process of selection is teaching us as well. Because I've seen even preachers not get selected to preach at a church because of certain outside appearances or style. Or certain, not that they were standing for the truth and could teach the truth, but it's how eloquent or how their demeanor or charismatic or educated, right? Oh, that's a big one. What school did you go to? And I've seen that, and I've talked to preachers, and I also some preachers that I have a dear friend one that he's like, no one will hire me. He's been preaching 30 years past me, he said, because I don't have that personality that they're looking for. And I thought of this today. How sad. Because he is such a beautiful person, his spirit. his teachings, but because they don't entertain or they don't have certain things about it, that's the same type of thing. Okay. Wow. Okay. Still was kind of a long class. I appreciate everybody's patience in being with us. So now you know where we're at. You got a little more time to read into those other chapters because it's going to get better. It's going to get really cool. And so I hope that you'll be able to join us next Wednesday at 6 p.m. And hopefully you'll be able to come if you're online, you're watching, you'll be able to be here Sunday morning at 9:45 for Bible study. And then 10:45 for worship. And then in the afternoon, 4 p.m., we're back again, and everything is live streamed. So until then, God bless.